Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to Command Point. I'm Shane, and I'm here with a fun video for you guys today, just kind of breaking down some of my early opinions on Into the Dark, the new format that we're all playing, that we're all chasing in competitive play, and there's a lot of different varying opinions on what's good and what's different. It kind of feels like Into the Dark has sort of busted the meta wide open in terms of what the consensus opinions are on strong and weak things. So today I'm just going to give you guys some of my opinions on 5 of the winners and losers of the Kill Team Into the Dark Close Confines format. So without further ado, and I'm going to alternate on these. We're going to start with, we're going to go winner, loser, right? And just because and I should qualify, or I guess quantify, whatever, what it means when I say winner and what it means when I say loser, because it could, I think it could easily get a little misconstrued. So when I say somebody is when I say a faction's a winner on Into the Dark, I'm not saying necessarily that I think they're better than one of the teams that I may be listing as a loser. It just means that relative to their current state and performances on open board, whether I think I see them moving up in the world or moving down. And moving down can mean anything. You could be the best team and then you become the second best team. I would call that, you're going into the Dark as kind of a loser of the format in terms of you're losing out more than you're winning out, if that makes sense. Just to qualify. So just because I think something is a loser, quote unquote, in this list does not mean that I think they're bad. In fact, I'm going to elaborate on some of these as we go. But let's start with the first winner, and one team that really stuck out to me in the right off the bat when I started looking at the format, and I've even gotten the chance to play against this once or twice, and I do think it's very powerful, and that is Commandos. So we're going to start with the Commando kill team, the very first, one of the very first of the bespoke teams. They've definitely lost their luster, I would argue, over the past while. I mean, people have been kind of down on them sort of gradually, not to the point where they're considered to be a very bad team, but they're certainly not the menace that they once were. And I guess to break this down a little bit, I would say that for starters, their sneaky get strategic ploy, or I guess tactical ploy technically, basically having the forward deploy is very, very good on Into the Dark because you do not measure through walls or doors, you measure around them. So if there is your opponent's deployment zone and then there's a door right in front of it, you can place your commando right outside of that door. Not that this is always going to be the optimal play, but this is an option that you have as the commando player. And I think some of both the aggressive play that you're going to get out of this and just of the objective play as well, I think it's going to be a huge benefit and a very common strategy. And also the fact that they don't have to spend CP on, I'm totally blanking on the name of the strategic play, but the one where they get to dash. I think it's shush. But the fact they don't have to do that, I've actually talked to some commando players that have told me that they like to use sneaky get twice in the deployment phase, which is actually so weird because you didn't see that very often before. But I think now you might see it pretty commonly. On top of that, being able to charge from conceal gets around guard actions really well. A lot of the time, if you're trying to charge a model in a room that's on guard, you pop the door open, and because you're engaged, they get to shoot you right off the bat. Commandos can charge from conceal, though, and that's really strong on Into the Dark because you can pop a door open, they can't see you, so your activation or your action ends, and then they charge you. And yes, they might get the chance to point blank overwatch you or, do a fight action or something, but still, the options are not quite as appealing as just being able to shoot you before you even get that charge off. On top of that, they have Lethal 5 Dynamite because Dynamite is a blast weapon. That's amazing. And because they don't need to spend equipment points on rope anymore, they have more room for flexibility with their equipment. So I think based on those things, I think we're going to see some bumps for Commandos. And I don't think this is a case where they're just a little bit better. They're still going to struggle. I do legitimately think that Into the Dark could breathe a whole new life into the faction as a whole. So let's move on to the next one. And this is our first loser of the bunch, and one that is near and dear to my heart. We have the Wurmblade. So Wurmblade is a team that is really sad for me to talk about here because they were one of my mains for a while. I took them to KTO all the way back in February, was it? Oh man, it's been a while. And I played them on the most recent CPTS Spring. And I do really like the team, and I think they're really powerful on open board. But there are some things about Into the Dark that does not excite me very much when it comes to Wurmblade. So for starters, doors and walls being on the board effectively turn off their potential for big turn 1 plays. It was a major advantage for the team on open board that's effectively shut off now on Into the Dark. On top of that, certain ploys lose their luster in close confines, like riding Ingress, basically not working at all, like kind of with barricades. And one with the shadows, same thing, unless you're using a barricade for concealment. It's kind of not nearly as effective as it was. There's not a lot of light terrain on these boards, so you're missing out on that. On top of that, you don't get to benefit from Cult Ambush for any models on your team that are going on guard and overwatching from guard. So they're not really a team that is particularly strong on guard actions. They don't overwatch very well. They don't have anything to reduce the ballistic skill penalties like some other teams can. Yeah, I mean, Cult Ambush is one of their main things, and in several ways it's taking a hit here on Into the Dark. So that's a big bummer for the Wurmblade. And then in general, hiding, the tactical ploy hiding, which is an every game ploy, is not really nearly as good on close confines. Having to deploy within 6 inches of your board edge is not super exciting, and a lot of the time you may as well have deployed them normally. So yeah, not a huge fan of a lot of this stuff on Into the Dark. So let's move on though to our next winner of the format, and to me that is Warp Coven. So this is another team that people have been kind of down in the dumps about Warp Coven for a little while, and I think rightfully so. They're a team that struggled on open board, not necessarily because of open board, but I think a lot of things are just kind of better there. So the first thing I want to touch on is with the really tight corridors and particularly annoying barricade placement. Ephemeral instability is extremely powerful. I mean, even better than it always has been. There are going to be moments where blocking off a corridor, like a crucial corridor with a barricade, and then using ephemeral instability is just going to be extremely debilitating. Whereas on an open board, sometimes you can get around it. You just have to take kind of an obnoxious route to get around it, but it's still preferable to like going over a piece of terrain when instability is online. But on Into the Dark, sometimes you have no choice but to go over that barricade to get to where you need to go. So I think those combinations are going to be really annoying and really powerful for Warp Coven. They have really good, I don't want to say really good, but they have decent movement tech between banners, fast sorcerers, teleporting goats, and flying sorcerers. All of those things I think are going to help out Warp Coven on Into the Dark and their ability to get around these boards a little bit faster than some other teams can. On top of this, they have an excellent host of blast and torrent attacks throughout the faction that are going to now be getting lethal 5 that may not have been getting lethal 5 before. Your Warp Flame Pistol. Now you don't necessarily need to take the boon. I'm forgetting the name of it, but you know the one I'm talking about that gives your pistol lethal 5 and no cover. You don't necessarily need to take that now for the lethal 5 because you're already getting it on Into the Dark, which opens up another boon. Your Flux Blast now has lethal 5. That's very good. And on top of that, your I believe the Firestorm is getting lethal 5. Granted, it's not getting the same level of indirect. You need to be within 3 inches to benefit from that indirect, but still having lethal 5, that's a pretty decent trade-off for Firestorm. And again, this is all relative. Like I said, they were struggling a bit on open board in my eyes. I don't necessarily think they're going to be top tier on Into the Dark, but I think that they could be considered a winner coming into the Close Confines rule set. So let's move on to the next loser of the thing, and this is where I start having to make disclaimers because I'm talking about Novitiates here. So generally speaking, I think they are kind of generically amazing still, and I think they're actually a very good team on Into the Dark. But I think the format probably hurts them more than it helps them. And when you have all these other teams that are being helped by Into the Dark, anything that I would consider like a negative is they kind of cascade a little bit. So it's nice for their flamers to be even better, but the flamers were already pretty amazing on open board, and it's not something that really needed help. Models like the Condemner, on the other hand, kind of lose their luster a little bit. Silent weapons that are not being able to benefit from guard actions necessarily, because they don't get to stay concealed on guard. And easier access to melee in general on Into the Dark means the obnoxious durability that is granted by faith points is going to be a bit less omnipresent here for the Novitiates. And then a lot of the matched play missions I've noticed don't have easy access to set on backline objectives. In fact, there's a matched play mission that has no objectives at all. So it's not quite as simple for your Pronatus to generate extra faith points. But again, they're still excellent. I think you can easily do very, very well with Novitiates, just because of how kind of generically good they are. So let's move on to the next winner of the format. And this is one that is potentially, in my eyes, the strongest team on Into the Dark, but, remains to be seen, I suppose. And that is the Intercession. So they didn't exist too long before Into the Dark came out, but they were already really strong on open board. And I think they're possibly even stronger now here on Into the Dark. So for starters, the big thing that I really love is the methodical chapter tactic, which allows them to ignore ballistic skill and weapon skill penalties. They can overwatch with a normal ballistic skill, and with guard actions being a thing in Into the Dark, you are overwatching a lot more, and you have a lot more agency on when you get to overwatch. It's not just when you've run out of actions. You can really set up really defensively and use Overwatch. And with Methodical and all the rerolls they're getting, they are kind of always very efficient offensively when they're getting to roll dice. And that's just on top of the fact that you layer that with how durable they are as an elite team and as models. They don't have an invuln or anything or a feel no pain, but they are super hard to put down. And with Methodical, even when you're injuring them, you're not really reducing their output. So I really do like Intercession on Into the Dark. And if you're wanting to run more Assault Intercessors, I think in general, Into the Dark is a little more friendly to melee teams than open board is. I don't think that's exactly a controversial opinion. So even though I would personally still lean 3 to 4 shooty intercessors most games, you are allowed a little bit more to go into a melee heavy build here with these two. Although I would still recommend always taking the Methodical chapter tactic on Into the Dark because it is really, really strong. So let's move on to the next loser, quote unquote loser of the Into the Dark format, and that is Pathfinders. So this one requires a big ol' asterisk on it because I was actually considering putting them in the winners. So how did they end up here in the losers? Well, kind of like Novitiates, I think Pathfinders are a very, very good team on Into the Dark. They're probably a top 3 team, if I'm being honest. But if anything, that speaks to how strong that they were on open board, in my eyes at least. That only being top 3 would be considered a downgrade or an L for this team. So let's start. The turn 1 Alpha Strike plays are shut down hard by the existence of doors and walls. Not everyone did this. Not all the top Pathfinder players were doing it, but there were some top Pathfinder players kind of utilizing this strategy, being able to, slingshot one of your grenadier forward early on in the game and threaten with grenades in your opponent's deployment zone. You can't really do that anymore with doors and walls being up. You can still play very aggressive with grenades, and the grenades you have are still going to be pretty effective, I'm sure. But like I said, it's not nearly the game changer that it was in on open board. Beyond this, shooting lanes aren't quite as easy to come by on Into the Dark, and melee teams are capable of getting in a bit easier than they are on open board, kind of like I was talking about with the Intercession. You can lean into melee on Into the Dark a lot more than you could on open board. I'm not fully convinced that it is a better way to play the game compared to shooting, just in terms of optimization. But in a world where melee is better, Pathfinders are a little less happy. Beyond this, they can be okay with guard Overwatch, but it takes a bunch of marker lights to get there first. Granted, marker lights are still going to be the bread and butter for Pathfinder plays on Into the Dark, much like it kind of is on open board at the moment. So yeah, overall, I just want to preface this by saying I think that Pathfinders are one of the best teams on Into the Dark, easily, in my opinion, top 3 or 4. But I saw them as being the de facto number 1 on open board. So the fact that it's not as clear and obvious to me that they're the best here, I see that as a downgrade. So I consider them a loser of the format. So moving on to the next winner. This is a team I'm pretty high on. At first, I wasn't sure what to think about him, but Hunter Clade. So much like Commandos, they have some forward deploy shenanigans that are very good on Into the Dark. It can't be used offensively the way the Commandos use it on turn 1. But getting an early objective lead or a strong setup for turn 2 can be really big with these abilities. So you're going to see forward deployed, what are they called again? the big, not the Rust Stalkers, the Infiltrators. Yes, you're going to see Infiltrators forward deploying on turn 1 and getting on those objectives or setting up big plays for turn 2. And I'm a really big fan of that on Into the Dark. Beyond that, they have equipment that allows them to overwatch without penalty. You throw that on your gunners, and suddenly you have really, really good candidates for guard actions. So I'm a huge fan of that. I think that they're going to be using that a lot more than they did on open board. I already know the players like Micromancer were having success with that in some matchups where they were out-activated. But being able to actually consistently kind of use it because of guard, I think is a big positive for Hunter Clade. Beyond that, the melee monsters, the Rust Stalkers specifically, can be extremely effective on this format in general. The only thing they have to worry about traversing are barricades, and they can get right over those with their optimized gates. And yeah, just in general, I've said it over and over again, melee's better here. So Rust Stalkers are going to be happy. And you could do a Servo Skull for some clutch free door opening in the early game to set up some aggressive plays. I laugh, but I do think there is some stuff here to be said for that. Yeah, I'm a fan. The only downside to Hunter Clade on Into the Dark is they don't have any blast. So they're not getting that lethal 5 thing that a lot of other factions are getting on some of their blast and torrent weapons. So they're missing that, but everything else, I really like the look of Hunter Clade on Into the Dark, and I think they're going to be a strong team in the format. So let's talk about the next loser, and that is Vetguard. I don't think Vetguard is necessarily bad on Into the Dark, but for similar reasons as Pathfinders, I think they could run into some major troubles on the format. Even with Take Aim, this team isn't going to be making much use of Overwatch plays. Their best ballistic skill is attached to a silent weapon that you probably don't want to put engaged and on guard anyway. And beyond that, I mean, I do think the Demo Specialist is very good here because it can consistently threaten from conceal and avoid getting overwatched by enemy guard models while still being able to set up some of those obnoxious demo mine plays. But aside from that, I'm kind of struggling to see operatives on this kill team that are happier being played on Close Confines. Maybe somebody can convince me otherwise, but I'm not 100% sold that Vetguard like Into the Dark more than open board. I just don't see it at all. So I'd say they're, at a glance, at a first impression, they feel like a loser of the format to me. Moving on, though, to our final winner on the format, we have Legionnaire. So this is kind of a similar story to Intercession. It's an elite team that can lean heavy into melee and has some good shooting as well. I think in general, I kind of glossed over this with the Intercession, but elite teams don't have to worry as much on Into the Dark in deployment because, you know, any team on open board kind of has to worry about potentially getting hit by those Alpha Strike plays that I was talking about with the Pathfinders. And losing a Marine on a 6-model team is just vicious on open board, and it can happen. It can happen frequently if you're not playing on on maps that allow safe deployment. On Into the Dark, just about every team can deploy relatively safely with all the walls and doors being closed. So I would say that Legionnaire, not having to worry about that is a positive. The most meta choice at the moment right now for Legionnaire is Nurgle. And their Nurgle ploys, like Implacable, for instance, fit perfectly on Into the Dark because they are allowed to overwatch without the ballistic skill penalty. So we're kind of hearkening back to this. I think elite teams having this ability is really, really powerful. And the nice thing about Legionary here is they don't need to really majorly shift their play style in order to get this. They are already taking Nurgle, so this isn't like an accommodation they have to make in their roster. It's not like, oh, I'm playing in an Into the Dark tournament, I better switch up my roster now. Chances are this is the same stuff that you're bringing to open board tournaments, and if you ever end up on a tournament that's doing both, then, I mean, even better. But yeah, on top of that, the Psyker's Fire Blast getting lethal 5 is just amazing. And that's enough to bump that model up a lot, which is impressive considering it was pretty much already an auto take from Legion players. So, yeah, I mean, I think Legionary are going to be really strong here. 3 APL is nice for door shenanigans. Not a ton else to say. I think we're going to see success from Legion here on Into the Dark. So let's go to the last loser of the format, and that is Void Dancers. Void Dancer Troop. They were kind of the menace of the meta just a few months ago, and I still think they're quite good even after the nerfs. Obviously, the nerfs were, I think they were needed. But I think undeniably a team with this much of the fly keyword is going to be less enthused about playing on what is essentially a two-dimensional board. It's still nice for getting around barricade cheese, but it isn't the game changer we've kind of come to see it be on the open board. That being said, they're extremely mobile. They have 3 APL. That's really good on close confines. I've always kind of said that mobility is overrated in Kill Team. There's some teams like Corsairs that their biggest pro as a faction is that they're fast, but I don't think being fast has ever been like nearly as important of a trait as like durability or like really good offensive output. But I think on close confines, having high mobility is really good, and Void Dancers are they're no slouch when it comes to mobility. So I'm still somewhat high on them on the format. They lose the Vantage Tac Op, which was one of their favorites. I don't think there was a team in the game that used Vantage better than Void Dancers did. Granted, they still have a really good faction Tac Op, so they are going to be A-okay for certain. And the biggest thing for me outside of the fly thing is that Domino Field on turn 1 was granting them a lot of safety in the early game that on open board a lot of teams didn't necessarily get. That was kind of a luxury that was more unique to Void Dancers. But on Into the Dark, with the doors and the walls, every team can pretty much deploy pretty safely on turn 1. So Void Dancers to me are kind of... they're losing that thing. They're not losing it, but some other teams are kind of getting that same thing that they already had that was making them stand out a little bit more and making them a little bit more special. So all those things bunched together, I would consider Void Dancers a loser on the format. I'm still really intrigued by them, and I'm tempted to give them a try on Into the Dark because I do still think that they're pretty fun and they're pretty competitive overall. I don't think anybody's going to deny that. So this pretty much wraps up the list that I've put together for you guys today. Let me know what you think are the 5 winners and the 5 losers on Into the Dark, and whether you agree with my takes or disagree with them. I'm really curious to hear what everybody has to say, so put that in the comments below. On top of that, if you're not subscribed and you're enjoying our content or you just stumbled upon it, consider subscribing. We're going to have consistent Kill Team content coming out, and we also do content for Marvel Crisis Protocol if you're interested in that game. So yeah, and as always, shout out to our followers over on Patreon at patreon.com/commandpoint. You guys are the best, and if you're a subscriber and enjoying our content, go head on over there potentially, and it's just $1 a month. You can it's effectively a little tip jar for us to help keep the lights on here at Command Point. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a good one. This is Shane talking about Into the Dark, signing out.